Hello, everybody. Glad you're joining me when I get this special time with Dr. Mark Arnold to talk about his knowledge around controlling the narrative. And I just got to tell you, I got to see this talk. Mark, I'm so glad you're here today. I got to see this talk at Cyversity's conference late 2023, and it was incredible. So I'm bringing it to you all, and we'll chat a little bit as we go here and there. But really, Dr. Arnold has very important information that everybody needs to just take a few minutes, listen, don't do other things, pay attention. This is really about where we're at today in society with controlling narratives. So, Mark, thank you for joining.
Glad to be here. I guess I should introduce myself a little.
Please
Uh,
do.
so before I give the title of the talk, just a little bit of background about me. I work at a small security boutique called Lares Consulting. They've been around for quite some time in the security community. I am the practice lead for the advisory services there. However, in my spare time, my passionate research has to do with oddly enough, Semitic languages and the study of Semitic languages. At one time, I thought I was going to be an Egyptologist, and that put me into certain conversations that both excited me and confused me because if one's doing the actual work, you're trying to figure out what that work is and not the sensational aspects of history. And so, as a trained Semitic linguist, comparative Semiticist, I'm usually caught in small, contentious conversations with those who are more on the sensational side of things. And so this notion of if we're all looking at 1 + 1 = 2, can we start there? And that's kind of where this conversation has gestated, in lack of better words. Controlling this narrative in the context of sensationalism and how does that work? And so I have this background in Semitic languages. I'm in cyber. I've had some interest in cyber war tactics as well. And so it's the intersection of cyber policy, religion, and race that brings me to this talk called I Didn't Know, Underserved Communities in Gray Zone Crosshairs.
I love it. And such a great way of representing your background. I got to meet you almost 10 years ago in cyber as a CISO. And I just remember connecting. And so linguistics, totally, you own it. You command the communication, and you know it in so many languages with religion on top of that. And then cyber and cyber warfare. I mean, my gosh, it's exactly the 360-degree view we all need to have, at CyberSN. If you go to my diversity staffing page, it literally says our attackers are diverse. And so if we want to think about how they think, we need to be diverse. And so,
Absolutely.
to me, I'm in the same place saying this topic is just so important in so many different ways. So thank you for your work. Thank you for your research. I can't wait for you to dump your knowledge. It's like Christmas for me right now. So let's go.
So I wish it was my knowledge, but we can start here. And so this is the person this is one of a few inflectional moments in the last 3 years. This person on the screen is Stephanie DiResta. She works with a good friend of ours who's in cyber at the Stanford Internet Observatory. And she leads a lot of the online investigative research there. She's with Stamos, so we know Stamos and all the good things he's doing in cyber. He basically heads the observatory, but Stephanie is definitely one of the stars there, and she is so talented. Just to explain the slide a little bit, I didn't have anything to do between gigs, and we're just ahead of COVID. I'm flying down to DC, just booked a flight down there, and said, let me find something to do while I'm there. I discovered this small con, CyberCon, that's put on by John Hultquist. And Mr. Hultquist is one of the leading research managers at Mandiant. And it's just a group of teams that do investigations. We talk about cyber specific security investigations. They're doing investigations that have implications on how nation state attackers are targeting us and others around the world. And so this one year, 2019, on a whim, I'm at this conference, and here's Stephanie DiResta, Renee DiResta rather, um, from the Institute, talking about three information ops, Russian information operations. Her talk is called Chimera. It was called Chimera. It's available online on YouTube. But Chimera is an allusion to the three-headed mythical Greek mythological beast with different animal heads. So think three animal heads, three Russian information ops. And in the conversation, my interests were piqued because there was a lot of content and data about African American communities. And at the time when, in 2019, I was one of the few African Americans in the room at CyberCon. There are more now as of 2023, and will be more in 2024. But a lot of the conversation struck me as new for the first time. The amount of data, how nation states, some of the nation states that were being targeted, some of the nation states running those information operations were targeting communities of color in particular, in the context of the sentiment around the negative sentiment around Black Lives Matter at the time, and other race-driven conversations. And so we saw from her talk data showing outside meddling of nation states to drive intentional wedges in groups. And so there were Black Lives Matter accounts that were taken over, and those accounts were then used to drive false narratives. We talk about narrative control, owning the narrative. They were getting into these accounts and basically taking over those narratives for pretty nefarious ends. And so you would have, for instance, one account being used to create rallies, and these rallies were not real rallies, but now you have one side showing up and then you have the opposing side of adversaries showing up. And so you're taking a false narrative filled with misinformation to disinform groups to come to a place or a gathering. So something that could start as just disinformation now turns out to possibly become something kinetic. And so we were seeing this, and it just kind of threw me. The fact that you see this hashtag Jesus on the screen, it's there because this leader that many folks in the world follow, I'm a follower of this leader, but some obviously have other religious followings, but hashtag Jesus was being used intentionally to deceive and to sow disinformation. So it's this very common theme hashtag. As you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, that's a MAGA hat on top of Jesus. So now we've got conflation of narratives that someone's putting together to intentionally lead people astray or lead people to adopt certain sentiments, and therefore use those sentiments to either model behavior or get people to make decisions, not knowing the source of those narratives that are framing those perspectives, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's like using the word love, as a weapon.
As a weapon, right?
As a weapon.
As a weapon. So that's what we had here.
Yeah.
And so I actually pulled her aside afterwards because she had other data just about, I mentioned African American religions, and she was saying to us during the conversation that African American scholars and researchers were being hired, and unwittingly they didn't know what they were being hired for. They were being hired for their knowledge to feed these
Mm.
these tropes, and these disinformation um, camps, as it were, to spin up more narratives. And the information is authentic. It's basically they're feeding off of existing religious divisions that I know about in Africa, between African American religions. You have your mainstream religions, you have your splinters, you have your cultures like religions, and playing all those against each other.
Yeah.
And it's something, just in my hometown of Boston, I can leave a church on a particular Sunday, and there's a group of young men outside screaming at elderly women, elderly men, with these kind of stringent strands of religion, because they don't agree with the mainstream religion. But there's an outside agitator on top of that who understands the diversity of beliefs and strands of belief, and using those differences to sow even greater discord. And so,
Yeah.
it's not just theory. I see this,
Sure.
on the block, leaving,
Yeah.
my church. So
Yeah. I feel like history shows us this.
it's not new.
It's not new. Weaponizing religion, weaponizing words. It's probably as old as time. The problem is that words are now digital, which means they can get to so many people so quickly. And weapons are now digital, which means they can get to so many people so quickly. And this is the layman's part of what everybody needs to just understand as to why it matters more now than ever before.
Absolutely. And so we saw some of that in some of the conversations. So we had um, some references, some articles that she used, and then some others I came across, the curious case of Russian lives matter. So why are the Russians involved here? Why do we think that? And, we think about this larger narrative around, who's telling the truth these days, right? So this whole negative aspersions against our intelligence communities. I mean, without our intelligence communities, without intelligence, we can't do cyber. And then there's a larger intelligence community that we need to gather information. And so some of the information that we see is, probably some attacks, at the time of this writing, against, US racism, using that to, stir up what we saw. Again, it's not new. We saw these conversations in the 70s, 80s about race wars. Here we are now. We've
Same.
got we've got speed, we got velocity, we got amplification, because the weapons are digital. And
Yeah.
so
Yes.
we started seeing these articles come up around 2020, and some not too far after that, around Russia's disinformation campaigns that are targeting African Americans. Okay, here's the I didn't know part, because a lot of the folks I talked to, um, we had these conversations in church, in social settings, about, especially leading up to the 2024 elections, who are you supporting? Why are you doing X, Y, and Z? What's modeling your mindset to choose a particular candidate? Again, this is not a partisan conversation, but the fact that we do know that there are there there's activity afoot to disinform individuals, and we know this one particular nation state actor has been targeting African American communities. And so it it became incumbent upon me, given what I have access to, and my networks, to begin to think about this in a larger conversation for the community. And that's why I titled "I Didn't Know," to make sure that there is greater awareness around what's happening on the part of outside agitators to further sow these lines of discord. And we see these articles like this, and making folks aware that some of our decisions are being framed by larger narratives that we don't control, and that we need to get ahead of, or at least be aware that they're out there.
Yeah. Yeah. everybody wants proof. So I'm glad you I'm glad.
And then some say your proof is not, some would even question, what's the truth? And
What's
that
proof? Yeah.
and I think we talked about this um in the talk at Cyversity, that it is truth that's being toyed with in what we call the gray zone. So that was Renee's talk, but
Mhm.
my fraternity brother had also said something that was inflectional for me in his conversation. He's Dr. Reggie Brothers. He was director at both the Pentagon and at CISA. He was also at DARPA. He was Mudge's boss at DARPA. So
Yeah.
this whole the worlds that we think are separate, they are intertwined. So we have Mudge and we have Dr. Brothers,
Yeah.
who's who was great electrical engineering grad, PhD from MIT. Had a company in DC where he talked about what they were doing in terms of understanding cyber warfare. What's hostile social engineering? What does that mean? There's this we don't understand this unless we look at the greater doctrine here. Um, in the Russian context here, and you've got Chinese context. Um, without getting too muddled in the definitions, I think the larger conversation is around what's happening in the gray zone. So gray zone warfare is basically war without war, uh,
Mhm. Mhm.
asymmetric war. How can we affect intended outcomes without kinetic conflict? And the way that they're doing it, I believe, and others can see, are through what folks like the Stanford Internet Observatory are tracking, these information ops. Um, it can be a certain event, and sentiment analysis is spun up in a moment's notice. False accounts online, being entrenched in these social media platforms to help drive those narratives and to be the cogs of this thing we call gray zone warfare. And so again, it's about awareness and getting people aware, being giving people some tooling to be
Yeah.
able to detect this and kind of become champions and of counter narratives, kind of ideas of adopting these I would say these pieces of misinformation and narratives that we're seeing out there.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
narratives the narratives are out there because we are, as humans, easy to deceive. And so a lot of the attacks that the Verizon database breach report shows us every year is that most of the attacks that we see, just on the cyber side, cybersecurity side, are driven by social engineering, right? Attacking the human. And I kind of drilled down on this at our Cyversity event, saying that, citing Thucydides, his history of the Peloponnesian War, that most people, in fact, will not take the time or the trouble in finding out the truth, but so much more are inclined to accept the first story they hear. I'm not sure if you want to chime in there, but it's
Yeah. Yeah. That's how the brain works in business too, like, right? When somebody even comes up with an idea that's in power, everybody else trying to to change that idea is not going to happen. People typically don't even try. I see that in life a lot.
sure.
And the more complicated life gets, the more we're willing to just go with the flow because time is a problem.
And it's a hard problem, right? To kind
Yeah.
of get at it, especially when we're seeing this truth decay across institutions, right? So we think about the devaluation of truth. Um, you know, we got people who want to take down universities, entire educational systems, colleges, right? Because truth, if it, as it were, is under attack. I mean, on the floor of the CIA, we have a scripture in a intelligence agency. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. But now all truth is being challenged, right? And
Yeah.
so this is
Yeah.
how this is how we can get this is how these narratives are allowed to spread, amplify, and the like. And because of that, now everyone has their own truth. So now contextually, your truth is your truth is your truth, and my truth is my truth. So everyone's doing their own research. So DYOR, I call it, do your own research. You can have individuals who've studied in the great institutions around the world, but someone online can put out something, and that whole platform gets overturned because that person's truth gets more amplified than, say, a highly researched paper or a high research study. It's kind of like the leveling of playing fields of sort, but not for the greater good, if you ask me.
Yeah.
And then the manipulation of deeply held beliefs is kind of what I harped on a little bit at the event. And then I guess the last piece of this was telling the story right after hearing Renee's talk at CyberWorkCon. I was in a cohort at the Harvard Kennedy School, January of 2020, in a room with all these defense folks around the world. In that room, listening to some great authors and great presenters. I'm not sure why I was in there, but I was there and privy to some of those conversations. And there was one author, P.W. Singer, who had just written a book at the time called Like War, talking about how we're seeing the weaponization aspect of this, the weaponization of social media. If we throw in these false narratives, we're seeing how those are part of that conversation. And so that at that particular time, I asked a question of Singer. He was on the line and presenting to us. I asked him a question. We know there's a problem that we have. We know the problem's there. What type of mousetrap do we build to help us, get our handle on it? And at the time, he says he was, without words, for lack of a better response, around how we get our arms around this. Is there a single thing that we can build, or because there are so many truths competing against each other, do we ever get our hands around it? It wasn't until summer of 2023, traveling to Tel Aviv as part of Cyber Week. I was part of the delegation coming out of DC to go to that event. Stumbled upon a small vendor. I'm not sure how well they're going to do, but a small vendor in Tel Aviv in a small neighborhood called Cyabra. They built something to help kind of detect. I mean, you can do some of this analysis yourself, but to do it at scale, to get ahead of these narratives, or at least be on the detection side of these narratives at a far quicker rate, you need something. And so Cyabra was one of those companies that is doing this work. They're doing the work for companies to control narratives about brands, about your products, your services, but they're also doing some of the yeoman's work around how can we use this platform to do some of the social, I hate to say the term social justice warrior work, but it's about giving someone arms, something to fight back against some of the narrative. And so what they've created is a platform that goes out and tracks sentiment at its earliest point of spike. And so I think I use this use case at the Cyversity event, where I gave them some seedings around AP classes and the whole conversation in Florida about African American AP studies, and that whole studies curriculum being tossed out or not being allowed to be taught, because now you are now penalized for talking about history, whereas before you could speak freely about certain histories, but now if you're talking about something that's considered divisive, it's being penalized and set aside. And so I said, let's look at let's seed your platform with Governor DeSantis, AP classes, slavery, at this particular time in the summer of 2023. And they put those query topics in there. Right when they did that, they saw a spike on August 16th. And on August 16th, we were wondering why there was a spike. Turns out there was a parade in Miami to object to Florida's stance on Black history teaching standards. And that's why we saw that spike. And so here's a platform that's doing some early detection. If you give it certain queries, it did some early detection, saw this. It's tied to an event. That event helped spark sentiment, both negative and positive, around this conversation um, about teaching Black history. And so here's a cyber security company. Their platform is being used to understand what sentiments are being spun up sentiments are being spun up around certain narratives. And so you can see at the top of the screen, we can't go through all of this, but at the top of the screen, there's a spike in total profiles that begin to get generated, which ones are inauthentic, which ones are authentic, uh, which ones are negative spreaders. In this instance, the negative spreaders are actually the positive ones, because the negative spreaders are the ones whose sentiment aligns with the marchers. And then I think here on the other screen, we see, some of these negative profiles. The explanation is that Cyabra analyzed the sentiment around DeSantis and the slavery. The insights that they gained were that it turned into over 1,900 tweets and Facebook posts based on this one parade. The sentiment was overwhelmingly trending negative, criticizing. So that's where the negative piece comes in. Criticizing DeSantis, his comments, and the AP curriculum. So the negative content in this instance for some is positive, because it's going against what we they're basically saying we do not like what DeSantis is doing around this stance on teaching and what's allowed and what's not allowed. It's that green section here where we see some of the false narratives spun up. So all the red here is actually for my purposes positive. It's that green piece that becomes the issue. And we see some of the pushback against DeSantis. Michael Steele's very famous resource out there in media, and there are others who joke about this. The Lincoln Project obviously is out there, and they're posting. So we've got all the negative sentiment against DeSantis, but at the same time that we see the weaponization of the narrative. Now we see more folks jumping in, and we see some of the folks who saying DeSantis misinterpreted, and some of his supporters are now jumping in. Okay, folks are saying to me, why do you care about this? We're starting to create animosity. We're starting to create sides from a specific small event that took place in Miami. We're getting this spike of activity. If we can imagine something that's even more impactful than that unknown and unheard of parade in Miami, can we imagine the amount of sentiments that would be created based on something that was even more impactful than that event? This is a small event that stirred up over 4 million types of responses in that short time period. And so it's a platform like this that gives us insight to how these things can spin out of control, or become alive, or take on lives of themselves, and become instruments used to create even further discord. And so this is just some more of the narratives that come up around just some very disingenuous comments about slavery. Why do you care? God allowed it, so get over it kind of commentary. And then obviously we were tracking tweets with about wokeness and misinterpreting and Jesus or Trump becoming Jesus, that conflation. All of this, these are important for me in terms of the work that I do, the intersection of religion, what we're seeing in terms of cyber war strategies, and the communities that I serve, and making sure that they're aware that these things aren't simply happening to be happening, but they're happening in the context of an outside agitator, a larger nation state agitator that's meddling to achieve certain outcomes that they're going after.
Yeah. 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 I mean, taking a tiny population and turning it into a big population through misinformation and using words as weapons is what's happening. It's so scary. And yet, thanks to these platforms like you just showed us and research, everybody, at the end of the day, it's about that race to organizing
It's the race.
the race to organizing who's doing what and where's this stuff really coming from. And I have hope that at least here in the US, our system can still work, even though I think one of the biggest problems we've had recently is how many of us have realized that even people we looked up to for years weren't telling the truth.
Absolutely.
That's how
I,
as somebody who's in my 50s now, and I think, oh my God, like that person and they were doing what, and they were connected to who, and they were staying at whose island, and what, like these people know each other, they're best friends. I mean, how did all this happen, without me knowing, type of thing. I imagine there's lots of us that feel like we've been told a lot of things that weren't true, and that just makes this all even worse.
and it does affect the way folks are viewing truth. I still want to believe that 1 + 1, like I mentioned earlier, equals 2. But for some, all truth is being questioned, all motives, all ideals are being questioned. And can we get back to some state, of something we can, agree on? Again, this platform and others who do it manually, we're trying to get our arms around the very strands of sentiment. It's a lot, especially when we got other things we have to do during the day.
Yeah.
This platform and others are helping, at least on the detection side, because that was one of the questions someone asked me again about that why question, to detect quicker, like we do in cyber, right? We want to detect issues quicker before they're exploited. And so I see an analog on the system analysis side. We want to detect quicker to kind of get our hands, around where the narratives are being amplified and why they're being amplified so quickly, and try to get management of those narratives.
Exactly. Exactly. Because many of them are fake in themselves, never mind
Correct.
having support to be in the conversation with the ones that aren't. And it is a race. And I hope to goodness that you and others that are focused on that to win this race. And Mark, you have such a wealth of knowledge. How can people, I'm sure they can follow you on LinkedIn. You're on Twitter?
I will respond on Twitter. I'm feeling crazy about Twitter these days. So
Yeah, exactly. So best way to get a hold of you is what? Me too.
I would say LinkedIn.
LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And follow your talks. I know you're constantly coming up with new things for us all. So I would encourage everybody. I'm super thankful for your knowledge and aggregating other people's knowledge for us all. So please keep up the great work, and let's do this again soon.
Awesome. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark.
All right. Thank you.